everyone. My name is Boyd Allen. I'm your host for a series of podcasts presented by the Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands, titled Landlines, discussion about land use on Prince Edward Island. The Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands acknowledges that Prince Edward Island is part of the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Furthermore, as non-Indigenous people today, we are inheritors of the treaties signed with the Mi'kmaq by our settler ancestors. At no time did the treaties grant rights of ownerships to the settlers. To this day, therefore, in all our conversations, plans, and actions around the protection of PEI lands, the expression "our land" requires us to acknowledge that "our" must be understood as a shared responsibility, not ownership. The Coalition for the Protection of PEI Lands formed in 2018 in an effort to raise awareness about land issues in PEI and to hold government to account on its responses to these issues. This series of podcasts is a result of consultations with our members and those who follow us on social media on which methods we might try in the Coalition's continuing effort to share information and spark discussion on the issues around land use and abuse on the island, and why successive governments appear unwilling to be transparent about why these issues continue to happen. Today's episode is called Municipalities, the Province and IRAC. Who does what? And our guest is Ms. Helen Smith-MacPhail, Mayor of the Rural Municipality of West River. Prince Edward Island's 1.4 million acres contain a total of 57 municipalities. These include 2 cities, 10 towns, and 45 rural municipalities. Of these 57 municipalities, only 29 are designated as planning authorities. As such, they are responsible for managing land use within their boundaries. As an example, this covers approval or denial of development applications. In order to receive this designation, the municipality must have adopted an official plan and land use bylaws approved by the province. At present, municipalities designated as planning authorities comprise a total of 10% of PEI's area. The province has sole jurisdiction over the rest. A third body also has a significant role to play in land use administration, regardless of who is acting as planning authority. This is IRAC, the Island Regulatory and Appeals Commission. As indicated in its title, IRAC handles any appeals of planning decisions. According to the recently amended Planning Act, these appeals can only be launched by an aggrieved person, including the municipality, the minister, or a person negatively impacted by the decision made. An illustration of this would be a developer appealing to IRAC the denial by a municipality of their application for a development permit. These appeals have the weight of a court proceeding and represent a significant cost. Municipalities on PEI are administered by the Municipal Government Act, or the MGA, which came into effect in 2017. This act replaced 3 previous pieces of legislation. Though a needed upgrade, this act did generate criticism, particularly from smaller communities. One common concern being the perceived pressure for them to either amalgamate with larger communities or dissolve into provincial jurisdiction. In August of 2020, PEI's cabinet gave final approval for 5 municipalities south and west of Charlottetown to amalgamate to form the new rural municipality of West River. This municipality became the 6th largest in the province, with a population of approximately 3,200 people. The amalgamation of Afton, West River, New Haven Riverdale, Meadowbank, and Bonshaw into the municipality of West River followed 4 years of preparation and a review by IRAC, which recommended that this amalgamation go forward. Ms. Helen Smith-MacPhail, our guest today, was the mayor of the municipality of Meadowbank and an active participant in the West River Working Group before becoming elected as mayor of this new municipality, a position she still carries today. Ms. Smith-MacPhail is also a teacher for the PEI Public Schools branch, a member-at-large in the PEI Teachers Federation Executive, and a director of the Social Studies Educators Network of Canada. We are fortunate to have Helen with us today to discuss the current working relationship between the province of PEI, its municipalities, and IRAC. Thank you, Mayor, for finding the time to join us today.
Thanks. It's nice to be here.
Now, you were a key participant in the creation of the rural municipality of West River. Could you give us a rough sketch of how this process unfolded?
Yeah, so this is a process that we started in about, I think it was around 2014 or 2015. There were rumblings that there was going to be a new Municipal Government Act that was coming in. So there were a number of municipalities. Like at that time, I think there was a meeting held with 15 municipalities that ranged everywhere from Charlottetown as far west as Kensington. And we all got together in a room at Afton Hall as an invitation of the rural municipality of Afton at that time. And we talked about how we may, as different municipalities, either come together or maybe look at some other options, how we may be able to continue as rural municipalities after the new act was coming in. So that was, like I say, back in like 2014, 2015. And then out of that, there were 5 rural municipalities, ones that were you listed there earlier, that became West River. Those municipalities all started a working group. And through that working group, which that proceeded for we started that in 2017. And from that working group, we were able to put together a proposal around amalgamation. So, and actually I have to back that up. It actually started in 2016 because we did a municipal growth study from 2017, 2018 is when we did our municipal growth study. So to do that, the working group had 2 representatives from the 5 communities, 2 from Boncha, Meadowbank, New Haven, Riverdale, West River, and Afton. And so some of those were council members. Some of them were just members of the public that were interested in community events. And so we had a working meeting. We met once a month at the Boncha Hall for 2, 3, 4 years. The first 2 years were put together with planning, writing a request for proposal for our municipal growth study. And then we worked with a company called Stantec it was out of Halifax at that time. And they ran our public consultation around our municipal growth study. So when we did our municipal growth study, we studied 3 different questions. The first question was it favorable for us to amalgamate, and what were the economic impacts of amalgamating? Was it favorable for us not to amalgamate, and what were the economic impacts of not amalgamating? And then the third question for some of the municipalities was it more feasible for a municipality to join with the large municipality of Cornwall? And that was particularly important to the rural municipality of Meadowbank, which I was the mayor for at that time, because that is our nearest neighbor is the town of Cornwall. So that's sort of what we were looking at. So we proceeded. We had 4 public meetings as part of our public consultation around our municipal growth study. And then at the end of the municipal growth study, we were presented with the financial impact of amalgamating and not amalgamating, and the general impact to each community of amalgamating or not amalgamating. So all 5 communities then had a council meeting and a public meeting with their public on the same date, which was in, I believe it was September of 2019. We all had our meeting. And at that time, the question was put to all of the members of the public that attended. What the question was, should we as a community amalgamate or should we not? And so I can speak to what was done in Meadowbank. We had about 100 people in our room at that time. And out of those 100 people, we did a very informal vote on paper and then counted those ballots. And out of the 100 people that voted, 99 people voted in favor of moving on with amalgamation and 1 did not. Because we met on the same night, all 5 municipalities, we wanted to kind of do that in order to have each municipality be independent in their decision and not be influenced by any other decisions that were made by other municipalities. And so each municipality went through that same process. At some meetings, it was a little bit more contested. I know that in Boncha, there was a little more discussion about whether there was merit in amalgamating or not. And that's okay. We really felt like it was a democratic sort of ground up process to try and figure out where we should go with our future. One of the big impacts in Meadowbank was the democratic process. I know, as I was a long-term mayor of Meadowbank, I've started as the mayor of Meadowbank in, I think it was 2009 or 2008. And every time we had election, there was an election every 4 years. And every time we had an election, it was very difficult to get people to run for those seats as 6 council seats and a mayor. You know, when you have a population of 250 people in a municipality, then you have one councillor for every 50 people. And there's only so much of a population that will have an interest in taking on that role. And so a 1 in 50 stat on who's got interest in municipal politics or municipal administration is, you know, that's a very difficult one person to find. So you're not going to have, so the democratic process meant that, you know, we were looking for people to run in these seats. So oftentimes I would have to call people and kind of say, you know, there's an election coming up. Would you ever put your name forward to stand for election? And, you know, to find that one unicorn in amongst those 50 people was sometimes very difficult. So, and all of our municipalities, the 5 municipalities, were facing the same kind of pressures. And so that was kind of part of what led to the amalgamation. The public meetings were an important part of that process because it meant that we were able to consult with the public over what our plans were. And there was a comment that came from one of those meetings from somebody who was from Ontario, had moved into the community from Ontario. And he actually stood up and said, you know, just to let everybody know, in Ontario, they went through an amalgamation, and it was a forced amalgamation. In the 90s, we had a forced amalgamation around Stratford and Cornwall and Charlottetown. It was forced upon those communities. And he was very clear in saying, you know, the fact that we are having a conversation about this before it is happening, he thought it was a very democratic process to go through. So that was really interesting to get that kind of feedback from people. Yeah, so it was a very interesting process. It was a long process. At the end of it, I used to say, like, it really led to the birth of a community of West River. And we sent our final report to the government and a request for amalgamation to happen in 2019. And it was a full year before they were able to get back to us and say, yes, we would support that.
Now, how significant a role did the province have?
Well, they did offer quite a bit of support to us over the 4-year period of time that we were going through this. And it was interesting because they would offer their support and we would politely decline it because we really wanted to do this municipal growth study. Now, financially, they did support us financially. They did pay for the municipal growth study, which was a $60,000 investment at that time, which was quite a while ago. So they did help us with that piece of things. And when we would go back to them and ask them, because we had a separate add-on which looked at the financial implications of amalgamation on each community and how much it would cost to be compliant with the MGA, the new MGA that was coming in, as a standalone community. And so once we got some of those numbers, that also led to people look at amalgamation because most communities' taxes were going to go up significantly. Their municipal tax rate was going to have to go up significantly in order to support what the requirements of the MGA was. So that also led some communities to amalgamate. So the province did play a role. However, they were not hands-on. And we were clear with the provincial municipal affairs that while we appreciated their thoughts and advice and the fact that they really wanted to be kind of hands-on, we asked them just to give us the time and the space to do that on our own. They were very supportive of that when we explained it, that this whole process was done from the ground up, from the municipalities up, as opposed to from the top down, municipal affairs telling us that or the provincial government telling us that we had to do this. So yeah, it was an interesting time because the town of Three Rivers had amalgamated just prior to us doing this. And they brought together communities that were apples and oranges and tried to put them in the same pot with some success. All 5 of our rural municipalities were very, very similar, with very similar attitudes and beliefs and very similar roles and looking into the future plans and that sort of thing.
Now, did IRAC provide any guidance in this process?
No, not at this point in time. And it was an executive order that amalgamated the 5 communities, an executive order of cabinet. I'm not sure if IRAC, they would have reviewed that order, but I'm not sure if they had any more impact than reviewing the order.
But they had no direct contact with you?
No, definitely
on this,
not.
or the planning committee?
No.
So now, under the Planning Act and the NGA, municipalities such as yours have the authority to provide development permits for proposed developments within your boundaries. Would you tell us what that procedure is once an application is made?
Well, I have to rewind a little bit, because after we amalgamated, one of our first things that we had to do was build a land use plan and an official plan and a land use bylaw. And so we can't issue development permits until municipalities can't do that until they have the planning authority. And so the planning authority was after we got our official plan done and our land use bylaw, which took a year to do that as well. And we did also have 4 public meetings around that as well in order to develop that document and that bylaw. Once we had that done, which took another 2 years to develop. So we were amalgamated in 2020. And our official plan and land use bylaw was passed by council in 2022 in October, and it was approved by the province in July of 2023. So then we had planning authority in our municipality.
So it's relatively fresh.
It is very fresh, and we've only been working in it within that bylaw for a little over a year, a little over 2 years now. And in that 2 years, we've had a significant amount of different people applying for permits and development permits and that sort of thing. A development permit has to be applied for if anything is moved, like any piece of soil is moved in our municipality, a development permit has to be applied for. And then there's a building permit, and the province is still taking care of the building permits, because that had to be within the legislation of the Canadian Building Code, and that was much more administration for us to take on. Definitely a stiff period of growth in our community.
Now, given the mounting pressure to free up land for development, do you feel that West River has the resources necessary to deal with these applications quickly enough while making sure that due process is being applied?
And that's always the pressure that we, as a council and as a mayor, we have a planning board, and our council is our planning board. And so the planning board would review applications, and then they send it to council for a final approval. And so development applications or development comes through the planning board. There's a procedure. So a person makes an application for a development permit. Then it is looked at by our development officer. Then it goes to our CAO, who has quite a bit of experience with development as well. And they take a look at and review all of the material. Then it comes to the planning board where it is discussed. And then if planning board is saying, okay, then council should approve this, then it goes on to council. Those would be for more complicated cases. If it's a simple development permit to subdivide a piece of land that is not necessarily has any controversy or anything like that, then it can be done by the development officer and the CAO. So it's a little more it's actually many layers of complicated. So, you might have to apply for a development permit if you want to build a baby barn or barn over a certain size on your property. So you come in with those plans and say, okay, the development officer reviews it and says, this is just a standard barn on a property and it fits well within our bylaw. Therefore, you shall have a permit to do that. So, yeah. So since then, we've had to also bring in a bylaw enforcement officer, and they look for people who are in violation of our bylaw, and then they serve them with notice of violation of our bylaw. So if somebody is building a building without a permit or development permit, then we have to go and serve them with notice that they need to come and get a development permit. In some cases, we have had people build items that are too close to a road. It's not within the proper setbacks, and we've told them they've had to remove those structures. So that has happened.
Now, early in the 2020s, there was a large-scale subdivision proposed for the Rice Point area, West River. When the application was originally brought forward, the West River amalgamation had taken place, but the official plan and zoning bylaw were not yet approved. Therefore, the province retained jurisdiction. It rejected the subdivision, citing non-compliance with several provincial policies. The developers appealed this decision to IRAC in May of 2023. At that time, West River's official plan and zoning bylaw were awaiting provincial approval, which were received 2 months later. IRAC dismissed the province's concerns and approved the subdivisions. So, though the province had made its views clear on this development on the original application and that it was non-compliant with the official plan awaiting approval on the minister's desk, neither party appealed IRAC's decision. Why do you think this happened?
That case at the Henneberry Point. So once again, like you said, the IRAC decision came down in May of 2023, and our official plan was approved in July of 2023. So there's a number of things that happened there during the trial, and the notes from IRAC about their decision and how they came to their decision. One of the items that was noted there was that the provincial government had a person who was working for them that had done some of the work on this file, who was not a certified planner. And so the certification of that planner, although they were well experienced in planning and had actually a master's degree in planning, they did not meet the requirements of certification board in Canada to be a certified planner. And so the big lesson for us as a municipality is that whenever we go to review a file, or if something is complicated, we always have to pass it through a certified planner now, because that was one of the notes that IRAC had made their decision based on, was that the developer in that case had a certified planner who had spoken on their behalf. And so the certification of that person became part of how IRAC was making their decision. So that's where you're like, okay, so it does matter if you have a certified planner as opposed to a development officer, and it matters if you have a lawyer as opposed to a legal opinion as opposed to a planner opinion. So now we have a hierarchy of how we have to go through so everything goes through our development officer first. If it's complicated in the least little bit, it goes to a certified planner. If it's more complicated than that, sometimes we've had to send things for a legal opinion. So those resources that we have had to curate in order to make sure that we are working within the law of our land, which is our official plan and land use bylaw, that has become a significant uptake. So you always have to look for the lessons that you learn as a teacher. I do this all the time. The lesson in that IRAC case for us was get a certified planner to look at anything that's difficult. And so all of our meetings, whether they be planning board or council meetings, are public, open to the public. And so we can usually get a sense for anything that is going to be controversial. We can usually get a sense for that. And then part of our due process has become to take it up through these different levels. Very expensive for a municipality to take this on. And that's where our resources, we have the people that can do this. It does take time to do this, but the financial resources are difficult, and try and work within our municipal budget can be challenging, because a legal opinion can cost anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 just to start out with. So you tack that onto your our application fees don't take some of those into account. And so, so it becomes difficult.
Now, since the creation of the rural municipality West River, 2 smaller communities on the island, St. Louis and Darlington, have applied through IRAC to dissolve their status as municipalities.
As has Hampshire, I believe. Yeah.
I knew that was in play, but I didn't know to what degree.
Well, it's at IRAC has not responded. But that's been a couple of years. Yeah.
But the St. Louis and Darlington, they stated that under the MGA that it was no longer financially feasible to continue. That was their primary reason for dissolving. Now, given your experience, what alternatives do smaller, isolated communities such as these have?
Well, I was talking to somebody, the mayor of another municipality, smaller municipality, and they have not taken on their land use planning. And so that is a spot where a municipality can, they can continue to have the province administer their land use planning. The issue with that, and this was part of what West River's drive to have an official plan and a land use bylaw, was that the decisions that are made by the provincial government sometimes are not in the best interest of a municipality. They're in the best interest of the provincial government, or sometimes they're in the best interest of a particular person who is active in a political party. And so those decisions become political in nature. And so that's the risk of not having control over your land. One of the things that we took on in our official plan and land use bylaw, and this was because of a communication or a miscommunication or a misunderstanding, I don't know, from the provincial government, where we were advised at one point in time that the control of pit, like shale pit requirements, we were told that those were going to be put on municipalities. And so because of that, we did a fair bit of work. This was mid-writing of our official plan and land use bylaw, which took 2 years to write. And so in the midst of that, we took on the idea of administering the regulations around pit approvals. And so we have that included in our official plan and land use bylaw. We took that on halfway through our writing of our official plan and land use bylaw, because the province had kind of said, you're going to have to do that. So we took it on, did the advisement on it, did all the work around it. Then the province said, no, we're going to leave that with our control. But at that point in time, we were at the point where I thought it was in our best interest, because we had done the work. I still stand firmly to this, that it is in the best interest of the municipality to have control over pit development within our jurisdiction. And we have quite a few shale pits in our municipality, like 20. So we have had to regulate those shale pits. And so now our bylaw enforcement officer, they can go out and enforce our bylaws around those pit developments. So while that was an extra for us to take on, that we didn't have to take on, we feel it was prudent to take it on in our official plan and land use bylaw.
The Municipal Government Act was brought forward as a means of modernizing municipal government on the island. From the outset, amalgamation was put forward as the key driver of modernization. Recently, however, there seems to be mixed messages being sent and received between the province and the municipalities. On one level, the Federation of Municipalities is calling for renewing discussions of amalgamation, while Stephen Myers, Minister of Housing, Land and Communities, while committing to short-term funding increases, is putting any further discussion in abeyance for the time being. In the meantime, communities such as Belfast and Surrey have pulled the plug on any amalgamation plans. Now, do you think the pending revisions to the MGA will address amalgamation?
Oh, definitely not. There's a couple of different things about amalgamation that you need to understand. The general public seems to think that amalgamation is a very negative idea. And I have spoken to a number of smaller municipalities about the idea of amalgamation, in that the items that we now do as a municipality, because we are five municipalities strong, we couldn't do that if we were not amalgamated. So we have 2 full-time employees who who work full-time hours in our municipality. One is a chief administrative officer, and the other's another person that works full-time with our municipality. We have a part-time admin assistant to assist with the chief administrative officer, and we have a development officer that works part-time and a bylaw enforcement officer that works part-time. So we have 5 employees now within our municipality. I was at the office today, and it is a working place. So the smaller municipalities are trying to struggle along with maybe a part-time CAO that's working 20 hours a week. And it's just too much work for so few hours. And so that is a big challenge around smaller municipalities, is trying to get the work done that they have to get done in order to be a municipality. So there's that piece of things. So amalgamation, while a lot of people will speak negatively about it, I can only speak in a positive manner. And so I know the municipality of Belfast, they had a lot of kickback from people who thought that amalgamation was not necessarily a positive thing for that community. But I would challenge that because, and I spoke to another municipality, and they have a very small population, 250 people, and are trying to, like I say, find that one person per 50 people to work as a councillor in that municipality. So they have 2 vacancies right now. This is a different municipality. They have 2 vacancies on their council, and have difficulty finding people to run in those positions. So without becoming larger, that democratic piece is, I think, a challenge for smaller rural municipalities. So that's one thing, but the other piece is the funding piece of it as well. And with our municipality, we were able to keep our tax rate at, I believe it's at 17.5 right now per 100. And our commercial tax rate is more than that. However, we still feel that our tax rate is quite low for the services that our residents are able to receive with the land use planning. We have put in 2 new playgrounds. We have five properties that we manage. Canoe Cove, the Lloyd Inman Park, which is also known as Canoe Cove Park, that is one of our properties. And we have, so many people use that facility in the summer. So all of that maintenance, that was only able to happen, and that infrastructure and maintaining it has only been able to happen because we are an amalgamated community. So the strength in numbers is a really big deal. So now back to the question, which was, the pending revisions. So there is a review of the MGA happening right now. However, I did participate in a number of those sessions around the potential review, and it didn't seem to address the idea of amalgamation in that review.
It appears that the province may have lost its zeal for amalgamation. They're not as supportive as they were initially.
I don't know whether that's what it is or whether it's because there seems to be a misunderstanding of amalgamation. And if you could call it something else, maybe cooperation, maybe that might get through, because that's really what it is, as opposed to, I think the history in the province of PEI is that people have learned to fear amalgamation because of how the forced amalgamation that would have happened in Charlottetown, Cornwall, and Stratford in the 90s, and then with the amalgamation that occurred around Three Rivers, which I believe is a success story, but had a few ripples to get through to get to that time. So there's very few amalgamations that have gone as smoothly as I feel West Rivers had, but I know that you can certainly find a large body of people who would disagree that it went smoothly, and they would be in disagreement with the whole process. So I think it's very much that amalgamations are something that have to happen on PEI, because I think that the whole idea of trying to get a council of 6 people from a community of 250 people is impossible. So, yeah.
Now, what did you think of the public engagement process the province used to get input on the changes to the MGA?
Well, and I don't know if there are any proposed changes coming out of that public engagement, because if there are, I haven't been privy to them. And the public consultation process, I don't necessarily want to speak poorly about the people doing the process, but it was not well done, because the questions that they were asking and the engagement that they had was extremely low. So, like, I mean, if you have at the public meeting in Charlottetown, there were I think there were 2 people that were not connected to a municipality in some way.
One of them was me,
yeah,
actually.
I think there were 3 then, because there was another couple from Stand Up that was there as well, who spoke quite openly about what they felt. And so the understanding around what municipalities do and their role in as a government, as a level of government in Canada, I don't think that was well understood by the people who were conducting the consultation. And because it wasn't well understood by the people conducting the consultation, I don't think the right questions were asked.
Okay, one final topic.
Yeah.
The province-wide land use plan has been in the works for a while. The State of the Island report was released in the spring as the first deliverable of this plan. A consultant has been contracted, presumably to move it forward. Do you see this plan as being a useful tool to municipalities such as West River?
Yes, I do, because there are pieces of our municipality that are not that we do not have control over, like shoreline development, and what happens below the high water mark would be something that would be outside of our jurisdiction. Some of the items that would be covered under the Department of Natural Resources or Department of Environment or whoever, wherever that falls now, that would not be in our jurisdiction as well. Highways, Department of Transportation, also not within our jurisdiction. So, there's a number of things that aren't within the municipality's official plan and bylaw, land use bylaw, that would be controlled by provincial jurisdictions. That's who would have the authority over it. And so that would be, where this could be helpful to us. Our bylaws have to work within the acts that are enacted by the legislation of PEI. And so if this is a piece of legislation that is written, then we would have to work within that legislation as well as our own legislation. So that's something that you kind of have to think about as well. So depending on what comes, if there's a piece of legislation that comes, or even just to bring awareness to land use in our municipality, can be a favorable thing.
Now, having experienced the process of amalgamation and the public engagement that created it, what form of public consultation would you like to see in place for this island-wide land use plan?
I think that the public engagement that we went through when we were doing our municipal growth study, as well as our land use bylaw, most of the time it was fairly positive. There was one meeting during COVID that I had COVID in the house and I couldn't be there. And that meeting was very uncomfortable for our CAO and the planner, who really had to kind of sit in front of a firing line of concerns and questions from the audience. And there was no moderator there to try and bring the level down in the room, sort of thing. So that was an uncomfortable meeting for them. And that was unfortunate. So people have a lot of passion about land, especially on PEI. People who are landowners feel that they have the jurisdiction over their land and should be able to do what they want with their land because they own that land. Now, at the start of this conversation, it was pointed out that, we are working within Mi'kmaq treaties. And so, do we really own the land, or are we really protectors of the land? That would be a whole other discussion. However, if people have a deed, they feel that they are the owners of their land. And because of that, people get very passionate about what they should be able to do and what they shouldn't be able to do. And also there's much more emphasis now on the roles of government and who can say what about what. And, people become very passionate about, who has the right to tell me what to do, sort of thing as well. And that's become, evident everywhere. So back to the question of public consultation, I think we have to be very careful, because if you make it a free-for-all, you're going to have one or two voices that are very loud that get heard. If you run a public consultation with maybe a board, or I really don't know whether you do written public consultations. I'm not quite sure how you do it. I do know that if we have to rezone a piece of land, we are required to have a public meeting. And at that public meeting, we try to listen to everybody's input as a council. And then we as a council are required to take that input, work within our official plan and land use bylaw to try and figure out what the next step is. One of the ways we gather information is we gather it through public meetings. We gather it through written consultations, because oftentimes people who would like to speak at a public meeting may feel intimidated to do so. So a written consultation or a written submission, and then we take all of that material and put it all together. So I would think that a process similar to that may be one that should be used in this very important consultation with the public around land use policies in Prince Edward Island.
Now, the critical component that you made use of when you're going through the amalgamation process was transparency, or if information was being collected, it was shared. Do you think that this is as critical for something like the island-wide land use plan?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the transparency is very important. And that was something that when we went through our municipal growth study, it was very important for us to be transparent with reporting back to our 5 councils that were part of that. That became a very important thing in order for people to understand what was going on with that process. Now, the other thing I've learned in my time as various mayors of municipalities is I used to worry because we didn't have a lot of public engagement at our meetings when we first amalgamated. So we would have a meeting and the council would be there and I would be there as mayor, and we might not have any public. And this went on for quite a while. And I remember saying to somebody, I'm worried about that. Do people actually know what's going on and want to make sure that we're as transparent as possible? And somebody said to me, they said, "Oh, don't worry." They said, "If there's a problem, you'll have people at your meeting." And, so we did. There was one meeting that we had. I love having people at our meetings, and there were 20 people at this meeting, and I was able to give them the information that they were looking for and explain things. And because they heard that from me, I was like, this is so much better than knowing that the whisper game is going on where, I've said something, but it's being said to someone else with, maybe 5 important words missing, and then said to someone else, and going along like that. And so I was very happy to actually engage with these 20 people who were quite upset about what their issue was. And people certainly have the ability and they should be upset about things that they're very passionate about. I am the same. I'm very passionate about some things and can get very upset about them. And that's okay. It's the discourse and being able to sit down and have those conversations that is very, very important. And so, so I'm always over the moon when we have people come to our public meetings. I just love it, because that's probably the most important piece that is missing in our democracy today is engagement with the public and having those conversations.
Thank you, Mayor, for helping us make sense of the complex process administering land use planning on the island. It's a big, complex piece for sure. And I appreciate you coming in and talking with us about it.
It's a pleasure to share it. I feel there's a lot of work that needs to go on around learning and educating yourself about how land is used on Prince Edward Island, and intricacies of a land use bylaw and official plan and how those kind of go. And every time that you can kind of raise that to awareness for people, the more likely they are to go to a public meeting and engage with what is happening in their municipality. Because municipal governments, one of our very four important levels of government. There would be the First Nations, Indigenous governments, our federal government, provincial government, and then municipal governments across Canada. And so, those are very important things. Like if you want to impact local, it's at the local level, which is your municipal government.
Essentially, all relevant decisions are made by either the provincial government, the municipalities, or IRAC. I've heard these irreverently but aptly referred to as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The genesis of what begat which and why may be the focus of a later episode. The existing process clearly has its flaws. The amalgamated municipalities are being granted further responsibilities by the province, but not necessarily the extra resources required to adequately fulfill them. Once again, there is a clear need for better communication. Also, the province must ensure the municipalities have unfettered access to any services that would make their job any easier. IRAC's ability to overturn planning decisions made by the municipalities, or the province for that matter, must be examined in order to recognize the voices of those being affected by these decisions. An email sent to CBC News in regard to the Rice Point subdivision appeal is certainly revealing. It stated, "Community consultation and or public input is not part of the appeal process. If not in the appeal process, then where? The inaccessibility and cost of the appeal process must be addressed. Anticipating an appeal should not be grounds for planning decisions being made. Meaningful public access is being sacrificed in order to speed the process up and perhaps favor preferred outcome." Again, I'd like to thank Mayor Helen Smith-MacPhail for making the time to talk with us today. I also thank those of you who chose to listen to this episode. If you find something of interest in it, please share it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We also welcome your comments on this or previous episodes.